This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Okay, so fair warning, this might end up being kind of an interesting show. I ended up having to record at a totally different time in a totally different place and using some different software today. So please let me know if you like how everything sounds. Had a power outage, so that means, I'm recording at a very unusual time, and also won't be any music on this week's show, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Super bummed. But yeah, I will come back with the full show, including a rundown of Revolution, some thoughts on some recent CM Punk controversies, as you might imagine, and your usual Dynamite preview. So I will be back with that and some listener mail, of course, in a minute.
Jungle Boy and JF, Sammy Guevara and Darby Allin, All Elite, highly esteemed. Wrestling's back on the Turner Network. Whether you need love or Adam Cole, or a thing that is your ass, we got the DMD and CM Punk and more on your AEW podcast.
Welcome in, wrestling fans, and you're listening to The Next Pillar, your AEW podcast, where each and every week we bring you a blend of entertainment and insight inspired by the latest goings-on in All Elite Wrestling, and a lot of things to talk about today, of course. I really enjoyed Revolution. We had a nice little party here at the house, as usual. Had a great spread. We did sandwich party, which is a great way to watch wrestling, because you can kind of... I like to tailor my specific sandwiches to specific matches. The CM Punk MJF match, it's going to be bloody. You probably don't want to be eating the Italian grinder during that match. That's more of like a tuna salad kind of match. In any case, everyone had a great time. And I got to say, though, things did feel, I guess, a little flat for me. And this may be one of those things that's just kind of lost in like a YouTube / WWE network kind of world. But and it's not something I necessarily see or hear people talk about that much. But a pay-per-view, can really be its own living organism, like the experience of watching a great pay-per-view from start to finish is an experience of its own. And oftentimes you can have a pay-per-view that ends up being better than the sum of its parts, where you have this lift, where even a boring match can be an okay match on a great pay-per-view. And with this pay-per-view, especially compared to All Out or even Full Gear, but especially All Out, my Revolution experience was this felt like just a pay-per-view to me. It did not feel like it got that extra boost that All Out did of being a great show from start to finish. Obviously, I had a great time watching it, and there were some wonderful performances, which I'll get into later. But for me, this very much felt like, especially compared to All Out, it was just kind of a flat pay-per-view at times. And I think it's important to note, not just because I've kind of the consensus, I guess, afterwards is I saw a lot of folks talking, that the pay-per-view was just too long. I saw a lot of folks saying that. But I think it's important to note, that for me, this show felt like a full hour longer than Full Gear or All Out, and it wasn't. And why did this show feel so much longer? That's something I'll get into a bit later. But yeah, for me, Revolution was great though. There were some wonderful matches for me. The one that really stood out was just the Eddie Kingston Jericho match, just because I was not expecting it to be as good as it was. Also the tag match, obviously. But hey, look, this is not a review show. So I did have some other things that I wanted to get into. But I did want to mention too, just for me, that Revolution was obviously, well worth my $50. And we all had a great time watching it. But it did not feel like one of the pay-per-views that we will probably still be talking about 5 years from now. Unlike All Out, which is, for me, a pay-per-view, I still talk to people about all the time. So I do think it is important, though, and we'll get into this a bit later, just there were a couple of moments in the show where I did feel like, this may have been a great show, but the momentum was very seriously affected by a couple things, again, that I'll get into later. So look, I know I mentioned this in the intro, but I really did not want to get into the nuts and bolts of this CM Punk entrance music controversy. I'm sure most of you listening to the show have been paying attention to this, but essentially, CM Punk came out using his old Ring of Honor entrance music, which incidentally, he only used this music for, I think, a briefer period of time than people may remember him using it. And another detail that seems to have been missed by a lot of people is that this AFI song, Punk, I believe I'm recalling this correctly. Someone please correct me if I'm not. Punk actually debuted this music for his dog collar match with Raven. But yet, so yeah, of course, you folks listening have probably seen this. There were a few blue mark professional shit posters who, decided to make this CM Punk using this AFI entrance, into a way to make sure that everyone, isn't talking about how great of a pay-per-view Revolution is. Everyone is talking about, is this too inside baseball, that CM Punk used this entrance music. So I try to stay away from Twitter drama, at least when it comes to wrestling. But I got it sucked in by this Louis Dangor guy. You guys may have seen this. Just this notion, and I'll pull up his tweet here. This notion, that the casual fan, this mythical casual fan will, somehow be put off of the AEW product, just because, CM Punk would happen to use a, entrance music that they weren't familiar with, is ridiculous. It's probably one of the best recent examples of a straw man argument that I can think of. And those kind of like blue checkmark shit poster guys, your Jack Farmers of the world and whatnot, tend to use those kinds of arguments, or the both sidesism. That's another favorite one. But yeah, the idea that anyone would watch that CM Punk MJF dog collar match and come away with it, that their main takeaway from that is that they're upset that CM Punk, used an entrance music that they weren't expecting. That's just a ridiculous notion. And again, it's the kind of straw man arguments that these guys love to make, frankly. But yeah, so through the course of this argument, this guy makes this point that you can't be expected to make sure, that you can't expect every wrestling fan to know everything that happened, is his point. That notion is so ridiculous to me because, of course, I would never expect a wrestling journalist to know, even a wrestling journalist, let alone a wrestling fan, but I would never even expect a wrestling journalist like this, who gets paid to write about wrestling for a site. I would never even expect someone like that to know literally everything about wrestling. I would expect someone like this to know about, one of the significant moments of one of the most important wrestlers of the modern era, in particular, when we're talking about him having a dog collar match, I'm just sitting here and I really can't picture, I guess, not going back and watching some of CM Punk's matches before this pay-per-view where CM Punk is having his biggest match to date of his comeback. How can you write about wrestling and not want to go and get that context, not want to go and watch old MJF matches? And, from where I sit, I mean, obviously, we do some ad reads and things of that nature, but I'm not like a staff writer on a wrestling site, but I'm still going to take, my own insights that I'm trying to get or that I'm trying to give, seriously enough to where I'm going to do some research like that, heading up to a pay-per-view. And I'll even be honest, I had not heard that song in a long time. And so like the first 30 seconds that are kind of like a little like monster movie type stuff with like synthesizer and stuff, I didn't know what it was at first. And I'll just say like, at our, little get together, we had someone that just assumed, once that drum part hit that, it was like a Terminator homage. And I'm sure that a lot of other people probably thought the same thing. 'Cause I can guarantee you that in the studio and if I was putting that intro together, they probably were like, hey, can we have it sound like the Terminator? Because obviously those drums sound like the Terminator drums. But I digress. And yeah, the notion, that this Louis Dangor guy would not like, oh yeah, maybe I should like look into some CM Punk matches, like maybe the last dog collar match he had before I watch this. It's just a lot of these guys, when it comes to non-WWE stuff, they just don't take their job very seriously. And it's very obvious, that a lot of these folks probably really don't watch AEW other than like the big events and the pay-per-views, which is fine. But I guess one thing that did come up during this discussion that I did want to push back upon a bit is just the notion that, to criticize people for not knowing CM Punk's entrance, is a form of gatekeeping. I've seen this idea floated. And I did want to push back on that just because I do think that gatekeeping is actually a very big problem in culture and even in wrestling, frankly. But, criticizing a journalist for not knowing an important part of CM Punk's history, particularly one that was explicitly referenced on Rampage, the Raven, that Raven match was, he gave the exact same promo that he gave before the match with Raven in Ring of Honor. Look it up. So this is something where I really just can't imagine not going back and looking at that feud in those matches before this event. Sorry to hammer that again, but I have a hard time imagining not doing that. So look, I'm not going to get into all of these tweets that were made on this subject because I know you guys have seen it, but I did want to speak, specifically to that particular issue. And I'm actually going to go about it a different way. Let's move on to listener mail, actually. So I had a nice email from Mark. So it's crazy. I'm listening to your show on a Sunday afternoon, and I hear you ask, what about Raven? And then at Revolution, boom, CM Punk is wearing the same outfit and does the same entrance he did versus Raven in 2003. You must have been stoked. You called it. So thanks, Mark. And I was excited about it, but I was excited as a CM Punk fan. I was not excited as, Blake Hickman podcast host. And that's because, and the reason why I'm reading this first on the show is that this kind of dovetails into this point that I wanted to make, which, I have people ask, just because they know that I've done, I've worked in politics for a time. I've worked, in music for a time. I've done a lot of different things in my life, and I've had some friends ask me, hey, now that you're doing this like project involving wrestling, how is wrestling different from some of these other things that you've done? One of those things that I've noticed just like in wrestling culture is that people can be unnecessarily proprietary of their takes and opinions. And what do I mean by that? I could come on here and say like, yeah, I was right last week. I said, I expected them to reference the Raven thing and they did. That take is also incredibly obvious. Like, of course CM Punk is going to reference his feud with Raven if he's having a dog collar match with MJF. That's something that most wrestlers, I think, would reference their career, but especially, someone who has made his name in part because of how willing he is to reference the history of wrestling, to reference his own career. Of course CM Punk is going to reference something with Raven. And I had wanted it to come off of more of like okay, we know this is going to happen, but when, as less of a like, this is my prediction type of thing. And I guess that's really the crux of what kind of irked me about, this idea that, it's gatekeeping to expect someone to get, an obvious wrestling history reference when they're a wrestling journalist. The idea that, CM Punk doing these references that some of the crowd may not understand is, I guess, intrinsically a form of gatekeeping. This is the argument that's being peddled out here on Twitter. And it couldn't be further from the truth because, of course, if you want to learn more about CM Punk, just Google CM Punk. You know what I mean? Like, this information is out there. Like, and I know that people are a little scared of, using programs like SoulSeek and BitTorrent and things like that, but you can find all of these matches, all of these interviews, all of these segments. And, fortunately, thanks to Tony buying Ring of Honor, we'll probably be able to find it much easier. But I'm just saying that these things are out there. And so if you want to educate yourself on CM Punk so that you understand a reference like that, you can go and watch it. This is not something gatekeeping refers to, excluding people based on things that they can't control, like you can control if you want to go back and look at what happened with CM Punk's career so that you seem knowledgeable and you don't go on Twitter and expect your hand to be held. Like, these people literally expected, I guess, Excalibur to just start yelling, like, he's using the same entrance music he used and I understand it. I understand, like, the WWE brain thing, that this is just like a result of, decades of stupid WWE programming and stupid WWE writing that has conditioned these people to expect, obvious and stupid storytelling. But the idea that AEW needs to, in every writing meeting, be like, okay, well, how can we make this dumber in order to win, this mythical casual fan is ridiculous. It actually reminds me a lot of, speaking of politics, it reminds me of the notion of a swing voter, where there really aren't any swing voters anymore. It's like this mythical person where, yeah, there's probably a few thousand people in the country that, might decide between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is that by and large, almost everyone has already made their mind up. And so to waste time, this is an idea in politics, to waste time playing for these swing voters and not to just play to your base is ridiculous. And it's the same kind of thing. Where I guess what really bothered me about this is that I do see a lot of gatekeeping in wrestling. Like the notion that, oh, well, there's already an AEW podcast, so there shouldn't be another one. Like, that's more of a form of gatekeeping than, someone making a reference that part of the crowd might not understand. And I do know that a lot of this gatekeeping stuff was also in response to, saying, like, you shouldn't make fun of people for not knowing about this. I just want to be clear. I only made fun of a journalist for not knowing about this. Most of the people at my house watching the pay-per-view had no idea, that CM Punk could use this music. And just like I said, I didn't recognize it at first either, even though you would think of all people, I would be the one that would immediately be like, oh yeah, this is great. I didn't understand what was going on at first. It took me a few seconds, but fortunately the commentary team explained it. I'm like, oh yeah, that song. Cause again, I didn't really recognize that song until I heard the vocal part. I'm just like that with songs, though. You folks might be the same way, where it can be really hard for me sometimes to recognize a song until the vocal part starts. But anyway, my point is that this is not gatekeeping. Like the idea that maybe you as a wrestling journalist should brush up on the history of CM Punk before watching his biggest match to date. It's not gatekeeping. This is what it reminds me of. It reminds me of back when I was working, at the record store. There was this guy who was, for some reason, extremely proud of the fact that he had never listened to Bob Dylan. And so, of course, at a record store, there's this became a frequent point of discussion where, and again, I really don't understand why this person was like so proud of this fact. But this person would, very regularly mention to customers, I've never even really listened to Bob Dylan, which was also a little fishy because we would sometimes play Bob Dylan in the store. But in any case, something really funny happened one day, which was we had a regular customer, one of my favorites and one of my favorite types of customer, which was basically, the guys crate digging for samples. Because I have a lot to talk about with those guys because, I'm a fan of hip hop, but I'm more of a fan of, 80s and 90s R&B, which is where a lot of those sample snitch guys love to go. And so I would talk to him a lot, and he was in the store one day, and of course this guy has to bring up, I've never listened to Bob Dylan. And this guy's response was, well, that's really fucking stupid. And I should mention too, that this guy very much did not look like the type of person you would assume listens to Bob Dylan. This is like, a very hardcore, hip hop head type of guy who, had once told us and, showed us on his phone, that was legit, that he had just toured with like a major hip hop arena act. And, of course, this guy making, base assumption I would never make, assumed, oh, well, this hip hop guy probably has never even heard of Bob Dylan. Like he'll get this and think it's funny. And this guy's response was, well, that's really fucking stupid. And he went on to explain, you can't really understand what's going on in music now if you don't know like what's been going on in music for the past 50 years. And at the time I just thought it was funny, but it's kind of like the more weeks pass from that incident, the more I realize, just how wise that guy was. And that's what this reminded me of, where you can't understand really, where wrestling is going if you don't have some, grasp of knowledge of wrestling history. And I guess, I feel, a little bit, because I know the knock on me, is that I'm not as knowledgeable about the product and, some of the recent history of the product as, some other folks. But by the same token, I do take this stuff very seriously. And so, if I'm watching Revolution, I'm going to be going back, with some of these matches and, looking at the history of some of these people involved, because that just seems obvious to me, And this thing, with being kind of like over proprietary of takes, to where I even saw someone really get taken to task on Twitter for making a very obvious joke about a photo. And I don't want to get into the specifics of it because I know that some people listen to the show. I don't want to offend anyone. But, the notion that someone should be made fun of for making a obvious joke that someone else made is just a little bit too far for me, honestly. And I do think, there is something to be said where I do feel like, some of the more wrestling-oriented review shows, going into the week of things, you can kind of miss some of the larger points and insights that can be made about the product as a whole. And that's exactly what I want the show to do, going forward. Of course, we're going to note the weekly stuff and we'll still preview Dynamite and, still talk about pay-per-views and things of that nature. But I really want to go and, really focus on some of these more long-term questions about AEW, where it's headed, the impact that AEW can have on culture overall, honestly. And that's something I can get into more, if you guys want. But I do think that there are aspects of just today's modern life that really have the potential, to fuel another big wrestling boom, the kind of which we saw during the 90s. And I think that's because, and I'll talk about this a little bit. I can flesh it out more, though, if you guys want. I do think that there is a moment here where we're primed for like another big wrestling boom, like the kind that we had in the 90s. And that's because wrestling can tap into an aspect of modern life and various aspects of modern life that other art forms can't tap into in the exact same way. And the reason why I'm bringing this up today is because I had a good recent example of this. Is another guy I worked with at the record store, actually. This is just on my mind because a friend of mine from the record store was at the Revolution thing. So I've been, just kind of thinking about that whole time period of my life. But we used to work with this guy, and I've been keeping him and I are friends on Facebook and all that stuff. And the other day, he posts this like 3-paragraph rant. And during the course of this rant, he basically admits, that he's been hiding the fact that he's like a Trumper for years. And I realized, midway through the first paragraph, I'm like, oh shit, this guy is turning heel. And that's exactly what this 3-paragraph thing was. It was a heel promo of him being like, look, I've pretended to be liberal this whole time, but now the gloves are off. And I should also note that like we're talking like Chris Jericho wife Trumper type stuff. And the fact that this guy, I guess, has just been like hiding this whole time was a major shock to a lot of his friends on Facebook and a lot of us, that worked with him at the store and, had no idea the extent of his, just how different his beliefs were from ours. And look, I mean, this is just an anecdote, but it is an example. And I can just say that, again, anecdotally, showing a bunch of people who have never seen wrestling or maybe watched wrestling a couple times or, not lapsed fans, people that just have never really gotten wrestling, the stuff that they tend to gravitate towards are a lot of these like the Adam Cole soap opera and things of that nature that fit right into this reality show, social media feed thing. And I know that someone out there is like, oh, Blake wants Vince Russo, but on Twitter. No, I don't. I'm just saying that this is the type of story that I really do think that AEW can tell, given their talent and given the freedom that they give their talent. I think they could tell these kinds of stories where, with this Adam Cole soap opera, it very much taps in to this kind of online drama that everyone is privy to now. We're all a part of it. And I think it has some real currency. And so that's why, stuff like that Kingston Jericho feud, part of why I felt like that feud was so hot is that it very much felt like real life stuff to me. People I know, that work together, who have developed disagreements based on, what did this other person do in their career? That's real life shit. And I think that the more AEW kind of embraces, storylines like that, the more I think they're really on to something. And to be sure, I wouldn't want them to see, again, I'm not asking for a Vince Russo thing where every story, is juicy and salacious and all this stuff. I do think, though, that, AEW has the ability to, maybe a couple storylines in the show are like that, and it helps them tap into that audience. I just, I always like it. This Adam Cole soap opera stuff. I know a lot of people are not into it for various reasons. And I will say that there's a nice piece on, well, I'll talk about that later, actually. But yeah, these are the stories that AEW can tell and that they should tell. And I think, from my perspective, as someone who, did not watch wrestling for a few years because I had a very similar thing where, and I have a piece about this, just on Twitter, at Blake on Wax. It's my pinned piece. You can read it if you want. Just about how I, stopped watching wrestling for a while for various reasons. And, as I come back to it, I try to be, in the interest of not being a Louis Dangour or whatever, I try to be transparent about the fact of like, look, I may not have the same breadth of, knowing who's like wrestled who, where, and for how long and whatnot. But I do feel like there's more to understanding something like wrestling than that. And I'm hoping, that you folks, even if you're listening and, you maybe feel like you have a better grasp of the history of the past, 20 years of wrestling, that's fine. I do hope that you still, on occasion, appreciate the insights that I do have, because I do feel like there's a lot of different perspectives that one can. This is so obvious, but yeah, of course, there's a lot of different perspectives that one can have, and again, I just see a lot of this. Like I saw someone on Twitter being like, "Oh, I would like to make a podcast and talk about, some of the smaller indie shows like Terminus and a few other things. I would like to do that, but there's already so many wrestling podcasts. There's plenty of opinions that one can have on wrestling. It's okay that there's plenty of wrestling podcasts. That's all I'm saying. Because sometimes someone that you may not feel like could bring a lot of insight to a situation actually can. In great contrast to the Louis Dangours of the world, who are only interested, in, what's good for WWE, essentially. I'm always someone where I want to have more perspectives rather than less. But that's just how I go about things. That's just where I'm coming from. Had another question where, hey, Blake, I actually really love your fantasy booking. Don't worry, this is not going to be a regular segment. I'm just wondering, who do you think should fight Hangman now that he beat Adam Cole? And there was a really nice piece on Voices of Wrestling. Joey wrote it about just that this Adam Cole Hangman Page feud really didn't have a lot of heat to it. And even though, I'm a huge Adam Cole guy, and I thought it was a great match that they ended up having, I thought it was a great piece because I do think that there was, especially relative to some of the other matches on the card, especially relative, to like Kingston, Jericho, or Punk MJF, Adam Cole and Adam Page standing across from each other, even at the pay-per-view, like you felt the difference. Like there just wasn't the same amount of heat there. So who would I have Adam Page fight next? That's easy for me, actually, and that would be Miro. There's been reports that he's well enough to wrestle again. He's just been waiting on creative. I think that's a great example of someone who you can take back, have a bit of a surprise because, even though people know he's coming back and he's only been gone for, since November, it's still going to be a big moment when Miro comes back. And I really think that the kind of match that Adam Page would have with Miro would be the kind of match that we haven't seen, from this Hangman run yet, which is him very much looking like an underdog in the situation. And I actually think that that's part of why there wasn't enough heat for that Adam Page, Adam Cole match. And that's because that, I really never felt at any point during that feud that Adam Page would lose the title. Even with all the subterfuge of, the 6 people that help Adam Cole win matches, it never felt like that at any point Adam Page, looked like he was going to lose. And I think that's a major issue that you have for the main event of your pay-per-view. So for me, I would love to see Miro get booked into that spot. You're going to do this surprise return. Hangman can actually look like an underdog in this feud. And, most importantly, this match will be really incredible. And I don't think you can really understate that. I'm a huge Miro guy. I actually would love to have Miro just come back and just win the title. I don't think he would be served going back into that TNT title picture. For me, I think he would be a great person to have the belt. And so, yeah, if you're asking me to fantasy book, that's what I would do. Had a question about Tony Khan booking Ring of Honor. Yeah, this came out over the weekend, just that he said that he would be doing the booking there. This person asked, does it concern me? It doesn't, honestly, and that's just because, at least right now, we still really have no idea what Ring of Honor will even look like when it comes back. And, I think that the other thing about Ring of Honor is that, I'm not sure, kind of based on, and, you folks can go and listen to this, just that really long media call that Tony Khan did. Based on what I'm hearing from him, I'm not really sure that Ring of Honor is, going to come back in the way that some people seem to be expecting it will. And so I'm actually not all that concerned about, like the idea that Tony Khan will, like his booking will sometime, like he'll be spread too thin. Because honestly, I kind of already think he is spread too thin. And so, yeah, it might result in another one of these shows where there's like you folks might remember that show where it felt like there were a bunch of interviews on the ramp and like altercations on the ramp, and then it seemed like the next week it was like everything was like there were 4 feuds that were set up by people attacking people that were talking to Tony Schiavone. It's one of these things where they do need to kind of like vary their writing and storytelling a little bit more. And so I guess it's easy to picture, Tony's running Ring of Honor and we suddenly have 3 weeks of Dynamite where everybody is like back on the loading dock or whatever. I guess that's easy to picture, but I honestly think that, if it is going to be like an NXT for AEW situation, there's no lack of people that Tony can, and he mentioned, asking Bryan Danielson and I think William Regal, he might ask them to help out or whatever. That seems obvious to me, especially given Bryan Danielson's recent, wanting to make this Danielson dojo thing. It makes a lot of sense to me, honestly. So no, I'm not worried about Tony booking ROH. I'm really interested in it. I actually really think that there is more than enough room, not just for like a AEW NXT situation. I think there's more room, for them to run a separate brand, and really have it be, what Ring of Honor was, which is, focused on the in-ring product with minimal fills, That's at least when I think about Ring of Honor. And again, I thought it was really funny because one of the knocks on CM Punk using that entrance music was, this was when Ring of Honor was a DVD only product. And yeah, I remember those days. I remember tape trading, frankly, like VHS tape trading wrestling. Well, it's like, of course it was a DVD product. It's like, what was the alternative? Like, there was no streaming. So yeah, it was a DVD only product. I just thought that was such a dumb point for someone to bring up. It was only on DVDs. How could people even watch it? Like, it was 2003, man. Everybody had a DVD player. Just fire up the PS2. In any case, though, had another question, which is just asked about what I think of the commentary team, and just mentions, this actually dovetails nicely with this other question. Mentions, just how much they like the commentary in Ring of Honor. And I actually, I have watched some pretty recent Ring of Honor stuff, and I actually really like that commentary team too. And I really hope, I know he made a public statement saying, Ian did, that he would continue. I would anticipate that happening, just because I Tony likes continuity. He likes the history of wrestling. It makes sense that he would just have that commentary stay on. But yeah, this person specifically mentions VJ, Jim Ross, and Chris Jericho. And that actually, I'm really glad that you wrote in with this question, because this actually is an issue that I wanted to talk about on the show. And that's just that AEW does find themselves in a bit of a pickle with their commentary team. And I'll explain why, because for those of us watching, on a week-to-week basis, I don't think any of us really want to hear JR, every Dynamite and every pay-per-view. I imagine a lot of us probably don't like hearing Chris Jericho either, who is just, I was pretty surprised actually, because I was impressed. I actually think that Chris Jericho is not that bad of an interviewer. If you listen to Talk is Jericho, and I do, depending on the guest, I'm definitely not going to listen to any of those episodes where it's like him going into conspiracy theories and stuff. I guess that might be entertaining from some standpoint, but I listen to the wrestling ones. If you haven't heard the Jade Cargill one, I'll talk about this a little bit later. That's really an informative one. And out of that kind of tier of podcast, I really like it when people I'm interested in are on Renee Paquette's show, just because she's a great interviewer and is sometimes, like, you look at that Dax Hardwood stuff, she's sometimes able to get like really good things out of people, and in a way where you can tell that people are just comfortable talking to her in a way where, of course, you're not going to be that comfortable talking to Chris Jericho. So it makes sense from that standpoint, but I did just want to give a shout out because I do think that she is a really good interview, and that's a hard thing to do. Something else I do also want to mention, just before I forget, because I forgot to mention this when I was telling that anecdote about the guy that said that he didn't listen to Bob Dylan. He left the store, and his story was that he was going to work at Dr. Dre's studio. And so, what came up in conversation? Like, oh, well, like, where is Dr. Dre's studio? To which this guy said, California. So you can imagine, him getting in his car, pulling out his Google Maps, typing in Dr. Dre's studio, California, and driving to his first day of work, I'm sure. But in any case, it's interesting because, again, I don't think that any of us are really appreciating, what Jim Ross is bringing to the table these days, or Chris Jericho. But these same type of viewers where those people are on the show for a reason, and just anecdotally, a friend of mine who hadn't watched wrestling in years sent me a message the other day where he's like, oh, it's so cool that JR is on Dynamite. And, this is his first time watching AEW, and this is the text that he sends me. Oh, it's so great to recognize JR. And I know that Tony realizes this, that, and a lot of people, realize this, where you look at how popular wrestling was in the late 90s, and you look at how popular it is now, those people who were watching during the Attitude Era that now don't watch, they're still just out there. And that text message that I got was very informative, because for a lot of them, when they turn on Dynamite and they hear Jim Ross, they love it because it reminds them of everything that they like about wrestling. But then, of course, what happens later in the show, he sends me this message of like, wow, JR sounds like he's really losing it. And isn't that, like, imagine how many other people are having that exact same kind of arc watching Dynamite, where you're like, oh yeah, I'll check out AEW. Oh, cool. Jim Ross is on. Oh, ugh. Like, by the end of the show, you're like, maybe Jim Ross shouldn't be doing this anymore. And I think, it was a nice moment when they brought, Jim Ross, they'd bring Jim Ross out for like a special main event, like that Hell in the Cell match. I'm not even saying you need to do something that drastic. I'm just saying, like, maybe JR doesn't need to be on 2 hours of Dynamite every week, because, and especially at that pay-per-view, and I know other people mentioned this, just how upset he was getting at Excalibur, what's the difference between a Liger Bomb kind of thing. I honestly, a lot of times when I'm listening to JR, I really don't think that he's even really enjoying what he's doing that much. And, far be it from me to say, like, well, they should can this guy or whatever, because obviously he's a legend in his own right, but I do, like, you do notice just how bad the commentary is at times, especially on those Friday night rampages where there's like 5 wrestlers on commentary. It really, really does stand out, as where you think, and, I'm reading this email. Yeah. Like, the thought of, Excalibur and the 2 Ring of Honor guys, like, that's amazing. You know what I mean? And so much better than what we're getting now. I I will say though, I do love like just how much you can hear that JR is enjoying saying shiznit. Every time Adam Page, is on the screen, he loves saying shiznit. I don't know if like maybe he always wanted to say shiznit and Vince would never let him say shiznit, but you can tell he's having the time of his life saying shiznit. But going through, back to this question, the issue at hand, the commentary team, and I was going to do a whole series where I talked about every aspect of the company, including the commentary, the pay-per-views, everything. It was going to be called AEW A to Z. If you guys would like me to do that, I can still do it. It's just, it didn't seem like there was that much interest, and I just, forgot about it, basically. But I did, part of why I wanted to do that series is because I did want to address this. And this is another thing where if, you're doing a weekly review show, you may not, you can't really go about it in the same way, where you're going to just kind of be focused on the week to week of things, where, looking at it in its entirety, does Jim Ross add something to the product? He does. And that's just this recognition with these, and I'm not doing like the mythical casual fan thing. I'm saying, that there are lapsed fans that are gettable and that will come back. They're just the type of fans that would not care if CM Punk used a different entrance music. But they like hearing JR, and I do think while this company is still trying to get a foothold against WWE, I think that there's a lot of value there. And so I would not expect him, or even Chris Jericho, honestly, for the same reason, to be removed anytime soon. And I think that's because the network itself probably likes that recognition. It is interesting, and I would love to hear from you guys if you've had this happen to you, where you will show someone AEW and just over the course of the show, they'll be like, wow, Jim Ross is really losing it, because it does seem really obvious, that he is losing it. Not only is he and when I say that he's losing it, I also want to I'm not talking about his talent as a commentator. I'm talking about the fact that he seems very disinterested at times and very displeased with the product oftentimes too. So yeah, I appreciate that being brought up, just because it is something that I wanted to talk about. So that's the end of listener mail. This is one of the longest listener mails I've done, and I will be back with a quick Dynamite preview in a minute. And we're back. So what's on Dynamite tonight? I think the match I'm most excited about, and this is obvious, is just the Sammy Guevara Scorpio Sky match. I think, for a Dynamite title challenge like this was built pretty effectively. I think this story of Scorpio Sky not losing for, I think it's 364 days or something like that, going against Sammy, I think there's a lot of intrigue, and I do feel like this is one of those nights where I would not be surprised if they did the surprise title change, just because they may have different plans for Sammy, other than if they are wanting to put the TNT title on Wardlow, which I think would be really interesting. They may not want Sammy to drop it. Maybe the easier way to do that is to have Scorpio Sky drop it and hot shot it in that way. That's not hot shotting, sorry. But in any case, I am really excited for this match. I think that Sammy has really shown that he deserves that pillar designation as much as anyone. You look at the quality of his in-ring work in 2022 so far. You'll just look at in 2022 the in-ring work of Sammy Guevara. I think it stands alongside anyone else in AEW, frankly. Layla Hirsch versus Thunder Rosa. This is interesting. I don't really know what to make of the way they've been booking the women's title. It seemed to me like what a great opportunity to put the title on Thunder Rosa at that pay-per-view. Looks maybe they're planning on having her drop it at this next Dynamite if she beats Layla Hirsch. Really, speaking of stupid people on Twitter, you probably saw this fake controversy of, look, AEW as this heel wearing Russian colors. This is terrible. Like, Layla Hirsch is Russian, and she's been wearing Russian colors from the get-go. This is an example of there's just this new kind of journalist who I find really troubling, which is the I am not going to Google anything kind of journalist, where if I have to look something up, that's your problem and on you. I shouldn't have to look anything up. It's a very weird, I'm not really able to discern if it's a form of cynicism or if it's a form of entitlement. It may vary by the person, but in any case, I really can't stand people like that. Chris Jericho to address Eddie Kingston. That's going to be a great segment. I am interested. I feel like, and I know AEW doesn't like to book rematches, I feel like there's enough juice in this Kingston-Jericho feud that they could and should keep it going, frankly. And so I'm hoping that's what happens tonight with that. Something else I wanted to talk about, since I imagine that we'll see her at some point, is Jade Cargill. And going back, let's look back at this pay-per-view and the moments during Revolution where things, felt a little long. And I'll say, just with our party here, the moment that really broke up the show, where people started, going out and taking smoke breaks and things like that, was the Jade Cargill match. And I think, I really think that AEW needs to sit and think about Jade Cargill a little bit, because I don't think that Jade Cargill is a pay-per-view wrestler. I don't think that anyone bought, Revolution based on this Jade Cargill match. I don't think that anyone is ever going to buy a pay-per-view based on a Jade Cargill match. And that's not to say that she's not a valuable part of the company. She is at this point. It's just, if you're going to watch an AEW pay-per-view, you're going to want to say a certain level of in-ring product that Jade Cargill is just not able to deliver at this point. And, when she won the TBS title, it seemed like a good move at the time to me. I was like, oh, that makes sense. That's good. But it's kind of one of those things in life. And the thing it reminds me of is maybe, there's a friend of yours or an acquaintance that you see socially and you like seeing them socially. But then, let's just say theoretically some things happen and you end up being roommates with this person. And it's kind of like, well, I like this person as like a guy to see at parties. I don't really know if I like this person like a roommate person. That's kind of what Jade Cargill winning that title was like for me. Because now that we actually see that the reality of Jade Cargill having a title is having to watch her wrestle 10 minutes every week, that's a much different situation than just the idea of Jade Cargill winning the title. And I'll also say, look, I get it. She has star power. I get it. I will say, though, the way that people talk about her, they make her sound like she's going to be the next Dwayne Johnson or something like that. Where it's like, I'm sorry, a lot of her heel shtick is just doing the, looking like somebody grumpy in line at the DMV kind of situation. You see this lady in line at the DMV, you're a DMV clerk, you're going to have a rough time. That's unfortunately how a lot of her heel shit comes off to me. Like she's smelling bad things or just looks like she's grumpy. And her mic work is nowhere near the point where people saying that, she's a star, she's the next big thing. her mic work is just not anywhere. It's not even in the same building that it needs to be in for her to be with that kind of situation. So I think they've done an amazing job. Like, I'm not a Jade Cargill hater. Like, I think they've done an amazing job building her up. She's obviously improving at a really impressive rate in the ring to where, like, she is a lot better than she was a year ago. She still is probably the worst wrestler. Like, stop and think about it. She's probably the worst wrestler on AEW that gets regular TV time. And I don't think that that's, I don't think that that's that hyperbolic to say. And from my perspective, I referenced this earlier, but she had a pretty lengthy interview with Chris Jericho where my takeaway from that interview is like, okay, well, she is signing with WWE like the second that she can. And so I kind of just wonder, like, what exactly is the point of feeding your entire women's division to someone that can't wrestle and I don't think is even that good on the mic, frankly, when it seems so obvious that they're just going to go to WWE the second their contract is up. Like, I know they'll have her put someone over on the way out, but I just don't know if there isn't a better fit. And I know a lot of people have talked about how shallow, the women's division is in AEW. And I do think it's important to note that is, and I know I'm the AEW superfan Mark guy, but that is an AEW problem. To be clear, like, if you watch like independent wrestling shows, you watch other companies, you see there's actually, and not just in WWE, like, there's a lot of talented women wrestlers out there, and you wonder, like, why aren't more of them in AEW? And I know they've done a great job. There's a lot of success stories that they have in their women's division. But I think, to me, it's pretty clear that they have an issue when it comes to recruitment, where again, there are a lot of talented women wrestlers out there. Some of them are out of contract or under contract. I understand how that stuff works, but a lot of them aren't. And I'm not the only one saying this, but when you watch, a Jade Cargill suck so much TV time, not really deliver anything in the ring, and, really was detrimental, I think. When you look at the pay-per-view, that is where the show was killed for me, because it was a match where there was zero suspense as to what was going to happen. And you knew the match was going to be really bad from an in-ring standpoint. So I guess just, from where I sit, what is the point of this Jade Cargill experiment, in the long term? Is this going to be something worthwhile for the company in the long term? This is something I don't see a lot of people asking questions about. It's kind of more of just like, yeah, she's green now, but she has all this potential, and, she's so charismatic. I don't really think she is that charismatic. And it's not just mic work. A lot of it is like her mannerisms and things like that. I think that she has a lot of work to do on her character. And if I was on the AEW writing team, since someone likes my fantasy booking, this isn't really fantasy booking, but if you listen to that interview with Chris Jericho, she talks a lot about how independently wealthy she is, and her husband's a very successful baseball player, I guess. I think if they're wanting to make, like, actually give her like a rich heel character, I think leaning into that would be the move. Where, especially in this climate, in our current, in 2022, I think a rich person heel could be very effective. And I kind of wondered if they were hinting at that the other night, where she was wearing that like money sign bodysuit. I think that is a very fruitful angle that they could pursue. And going forward with Jade, I hope that they've been doing a real disservice to her in booking her in these matches that kind of expose her as being so green. I was kind of confused. Like, this seems like the great opportunity to either, maybe like put her in a tag team with someone and they can have like a mixed thing, like what they did with the Shaq thing, or put her in like a 3-way or a 4-way where there's more women that can actually wrestle and cover things up for her. But yeah, just from where I sit, it really is becoming like a bad roommate situation where you're like, oh my God, like just knowing, oh yeah, on Dynamite, there's going to be a 10-minute segment with Jade Cargill that I'm going to take a piss during. This is a problem for me, and I think it's something that other people will tap into as well. So let me know what you guys think about that, because yeah, I'm not And it's not that I don't like, I understand the appeal. I think they've been doing a great job building her up. It's just, I think if you're going to make the bread and butter of your company, you know, we are the wrestling company. Our fans are wrestling fans. Our wrestlers are pro wrestlers. Committing 10 minutes of your TV every week to a bad in-ring product, and it's bad. It's a bad in-ring product. Like, even her matches that are better, they are still bad, especially relative to other women in the women's division, or of course, you know, like the other matches on Dynamite in totality, you know, but even compared to a lot of the other people in the most people in the women's division, you know, I couldn't be more excited, you know, that Hikaru Shida came back, you know, on Rampage, because that's, she's my favorite person in the division. And I hope that they actually will give her, you know, beyond this Serena Deeb thing, something to really sink her teeth into, because I think Hikaru Shida is just a tremendous worker. And if you read some of her interviews, I know there was the one where she was, you know, complaining about travel arrangements and things of that nature, which I saw people brushing off pretty quickly, you know, as like, well, of course they're not going to find you a place to live and da-da-da. That's something that is more, from what I know, something that's a lot more common in wrestling in other countries, you know, where they help you find a place to live and things like that. I actually think it was pretty reasonable that she would expect something like that, and I will understand why she would be upset if that didn't end up happening, like she didn't get the kind of help that she felt like she needed. Because you think about, you know, how difficult it must be to be a wrestler in a country that is not your country. That's got to be really difficult. And part of why, you know, I would love to see them actually do something more with Hikaru Shida. Like if they don't, for whatever reason, want to drop the belt to Thunder Rosa, even though it seems like something they should do and that people would like to see them do, maybe you put her in the feud with Britt Baker. Because I do think that it is getting to the point where it feels like they need to do something pretty drastically different with the women's division, and not just with the belt. You know, I think this has been something, again, you know, most eloquently, the Everything Elite podcast has talked about this issue with the women's division, but it's something that a lot of other people are talking about as well. And just, you know, as I'm kind of introducing AEW to people that haven't watched wrestling or haven't watched wrestling in a few years, that is one of the things that stands out, especially if we're talking about the AEW product versus the WWE product. Like, that's kind of the thing. The women's division, that's always the thing that I have to be like, well, yeah, I know, like, there's more, the WWE's done a better job with that, and they have. And, you know, for someone that, you know, literally thinks that the WWE is an evil company, that's something that I will even, you know, I will even give that to them. They have a great women's division that they love to use to help prop up the Saudi government. But in any case, that's all I can find on Dynamite tonight. I'm sure we'll hear from CM Punk, you know, MJF. There's things that aren't announced that we know will happen. Something else that I would like to see addressed, I know they recently, I know that Owen Hart tournament isn't starting for a couple months, but I would like to hear a little bit more about that. Something else I expect to see is there has been some kind of rumblings of them doing something with New Japan. I don't know if you guys were watching that press conference, which, by the way, you know, you want to talk about how worthless these like blue checkmark shit posters are. More than any, you know, Twitter discussion or podcast or anything, I find myself, you know, I get a lot more out of listening to these media scrums than I do out of anything else. And there was a really interesting tidbit, and this may have just been a joke that I picked up on and I'm making too much of it, but you can go back and look at this. It was during CM Punk's thing. He was talking about just how MJF is such a wrestling fan and is so knowledgeable about even really obscure, you know, wrestling that you've never heard of. And then just like randomly, CM Punk added this aside, and I don't have a quote in front of me, but he was like, I think he does hate New Japan, though, which is like really interesting because, of course, MJF doesn't actually hate New Japan. I just wondered, like, oh, like, are they going to like set this thing up where, because there's been all these reports of, you know, Okada's going to come for like a little run in the States. It would be really interesting, I think, to have to maybe like get him involved in this CM Punk MJF feud. And again, this may just be like me making too much out of a little joke here, but if you looked at Tony's reaction to it, what an amazing way for them to, you know, do this event with New Japan, but to have MJF, you know, talking shit about New Japan and Okada. Like, there's a storyline there that could be really fun and interesting that I would like to see happen. And I promise that I will take, unless you guys ask me for specific things, I'm going to take a vacation, a fantasy booking vacation. 2 times in this show is enough. But yeah, I think, because, you know, when I first heard this, like, oh yeah, New Japan, you know, is going to do some stuff with AEW and Okada might be part of it. Of course, the first thing you think of immediately is like Bryan Danielson and like, oh, is this going to be like a celebration of like really good in-ring wrestling? That's just kind of where I would assume they would go with it. But now that I'm thinking like, oh man, it could be really entertaining to have MJF, like to almost bring in New Japan to AEW as the face, you know, company in a feud against MJF. What a better way to introduce Okada to an American audience, you know? Because the AEW fans, like, obviously they're gonna lose their shit when they see Okada in the ring, but especially, you know, him face against MJF, like I think that's a really interesting way to do an invasion angle like that, and something they might want to consider. But again, I'm going to take a fantasy booking vacation starting right now. So that's what we have for tonight's Dynamite. I did want to come and just talk a little bit just about CM Punk. I'll be back and I'm going to talk about it just a little bit just in a few minutes.
Catch me
So I wanted to just come back for a bit and just give my thoughts on this CM Punk feud with MJF, just since I have been paying a lot of attention to it, and we had this just tremendous dog collar match on Sunday, which I feel like will likely wrap this feud up, and I can't imagine a more perfect way to wrap the feud up. Something I've been thinking about CM Punk a lot since I started doing this show, and kind of highlighting this feud in particular. I think what we saw on Sunday was, and I mentioned this, that we wanted to see CM Punk be CM Punk again. And I think after this Sunday, we can all say that CM Punk is back. He came back on August 20th, but the CM Punk that we really know and love, he came back he came back on Sunday at Revolution. I really recommend, I mentioned this earlier, to go back and watch that press conference with him and Tony Khan after the event. CM Punk spends most of it in tears, crying, and I was crying a little bit too, watching him well up, because and again, I'm not, these aren't direct quotes here, but he mentioned just that he felt like his career was cut short, and that he has had a lot of really good years, of his career, that were more or less, taken away from him by WWE. And I thought it was very telling, that he made a specific point of mentioning just how happy he is that Ring of Honor footage, and he even said that, it was going to come down to two people, and I'm glad that Tony has it. I think the question that I had in watching this, is just, why was CM Punk crying? CM Punk's tears, what caused them, And I think for me, CM Punk is at his best, especially as a face, also as a hero, but especially as a face, is when CM Punk is ruthless in his pursuit of the truth. That is the thing that is great about CM Punk, is his embrace of the truth, of authenticity. What is his defining moment as a pro wrestler? It's his infamous pipe bomb promo. That was all about CM Punk wanting to tell things how they were, wanting to speak truth to power, wanting to pursue the authentic, to pursue the real. This is CM Punk at his greatest, and we finally saw CM Punk doing just that with this feud with MJF. And I think, at the time that promo that he did back in the fall, where, he mentioned wanting to, set straight the bullies of AEW, at the time, that could seem like just some connective tissue of how to, get him into this feud with MJF or whatever. But I actually think that there's more to it. And I think that CM Punk's anti-bully, face character that he has, I think that's just who CM Punk is now. And I think that's because, and he's spoken a lot to, his bad experience in WWE and, his bad experience in the locker room. I think that CM Punk, more than anyone else, has been a victim of bullying and knows, the damage that bullying really does, not just to people, but to communities, to professions like wrestling. Bullying is a very serious thing. And I think that that promo back in the fall, again, it wasn't just connective tissue. It was really him saying, like, I am going to be this anti-bully, like, face character. This is him. Because for a couple months, CM Punk was happy Phil Brooks, and we got to see him come back and be happy. But I think that when he did that promo talking about, like, I'm going to set straight the bullies, I think that was him saying, like, look, I'm back. This is my character now. And I think with this MJF feud, that's really where this character has crystallized. Particularly, I know that it seemed like maybe an obvious thing that MJF ended up, turning on him, and, like, how could CM Punk not see that coming? That this was just an artifice on MJF just being emotionally manipulative. The thing is, though, what did CM Punk say when he came out, after MJF did that amazing promo? He asked him, is that real? And just saying that, like, I get chills because you see just how, and this feud was a little shaky, at first, like, especially that promo where Britt Baker came up and all this kind of WWE stuff. But that kind of character work of what is the thing that CM Punk asked? Is this real? Because that's always where CM Punk is at his best, is in his pursuit of the real, his pursuit of the truth. And so CM Punk, of course, in character, knew that MJF would turn on him like that. I think CM Punk, the character, was wanting to see if he would actually stoop to that level. And then if MJF did stoop to that level, he would then the promo on Rampage where he talks about, he references his famous promo of wanting to become a monster to fight the monsters of the world. And you just think about all the work that CM Punk has done, to say, I left professional wrestling when I left Ring of Honor and now I'm back. Of course he's going to want to revisit some of these great Ring of Honor moments, including him wanting to be the CM Punk that CM Punk wants to be. Just how important that is to him. Knowing, the core, of who he is, at least his public persona, I would argue that it is that he also realizes, that he is back now and that he is the kind of CM Punk that can have the best match on a card. And I think at one point or another, he may have thought that those days passed him by, whereas now I think he's probably realizing, not only can I still do this, but holy shit, how much fun have I been missing out on? And for me, it's just neat to see, not just as a long-time CM Punk fan, but also as someone, that is his age. And, this is the time in life where you really do take stock of what you've been able to accomplish and mistakes that you've made and things you've missed out on. The gravity of that, when you are our age, it really starts to weigh on you in a way that it just doesn't when you're in your 20s. And so it makes sense to me, CM Punk's tears. And just as a fan, again, part of why I wanted to do this podcast is to document just what's going on in AEW. And a big part of that is just the brilliance of CM Punk. And for me as a long-term CM Punk fan, to see him be one of the interesting parts of this wrestling company who for so long, finally there is a reasonable and finally there's a realistic alternative, I should say, to the WWE, to have him, be in a lot of ways the head of the spear on that now in the work that he's able to do with this MJF feud and going forward. It's immensely exciting. And I would really, I'm really excited to see where he goes from here. And I'm on a fantasy booking vacation, and so I'm not going to mention where I think that should be. You folks probably have some great ideas too. And ultimately, we're talking about CM Punk in AEW. It's probably going to be great, regardless of what it is, now that he's found his footing. So someone else that I wanted to mention on today's show is Bobby Fish. That's right. Bobby Fish. Today's words of wisdom are for Bobby Fish. They are inspired by just his amazing scenery eating. I'm someone where, I consider myself a scenery eater. I'm a frequent photo bomber, as you might imagine. And it's just something I really appreciate. But something I did want to say, Bobby, is that, it takes a special kind of person to be the scenery eating guy in a stable. And you're doing a great job. But one thing I will say is that, just about anybody, can be in a stable. You just have to be asked. I've never been in a stable, but, I could be if I was asked. And so I'm just saying, for you, Bobby Fish, you're